1:45 Eastern Time or 10:45 in the morning here on the West Coast. So I am going to go on and kick us off. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and choosing our session to attend. We got a good one today. We are going to be sharing how a fast, human centered response to the 2025 LA wildfires turned into a reusable model for simpler, trauma informed public benefits forms and a path toward One California service delivery. My name is Caroline Smith. I'm the Chief Transformation Officer over the Critical Services team at the state of California, and I was honored to be the executive sponsor of this initiative. Joining me today are partners who each moved this work forward. Lisa Carter and Mei Tan from the U.S. Digital Response, who helped shape the unified form and digital portal concept. Anirban Sen from California Department of Technology, the product lead connecting identity and eligibility. And Joseph Ladeau from Employment Development Department, who is a state partner taking these lessons to scale. We are going to talk about how the LA wildfires didn't just trigger emergency response. They sparked a cross agency effort that led to a common benefits application form concept and a digital disaster portal blueprint. Today, we're going to cover how the work started and how we scoped fast without boiling the ocean, what it took to create a unified form and disaster recovery portal concept, the team that ran the first end-to-end pilot with identity and eligibility, and finally, how a state agency is now applying and scaling the model. When disaster hits, people aren't thinking, which agency handles what? They need clear, fast, trustworthy help. The LA fires were a true stress test for our state services and IT. Mass evacuations, thousands of destroyed structures, and vital documents were lost, like IDs and birth and marriage certificates. Survivors faced dozens of scattered forms and websites, repeated questions, and paper based processes, all while in crisis. Staff and community partners were doing heroes' work, but processes and systems made help fragmented and slow. Leadership asked, how might California show up as one government, even if delivery stays distributed? We convened U.S. Digital Response and 8 agencies who offered critical services to survivors, scoped the problem tightly, and agreed on a single success test: fewer steps and clearer paths for Californians across programs. That let us deliver actionable artifacts, not shelfware. I am now going to hand it over to Lisa and May from US Digital Response, who will walk us through the research and design of the form and disaster portal concept.
Thanks, Caroline, for that context. As you heard from Caroline, the next steps for our team was to get really close to the forms themselves. It was a team of 4 of us from USDR. Lisa Carter, Terry Perona, and myself were tasked with looking at 22 forms across 8 different state agencies, including the EDD, HCD, and DMV, to name a few. And so the forms themselves actually cover a wide range of services, everything from applying for food benefits to filing for unemployment insurance. And reviewing the forms individually actually helped give us an understanding for the variation in scope and complexity, as well as an appreciation for just how fragmented the experience is today for disaster survivors who are needing to apply for these services following surviving a disaster. Oh, thanks, Caroline. And so how did we make sense of the forms? We decided to conduct a content audit of the 22 forms, covering over 1,000 form fields in the space of about a week and a half. And we divided the forms between us in the team. So each person took about forms from about 2 to 3 different agencies and broke it down field by field, breaking it right down to its individual component level. So logging things such as the label of a form field, the field type, and adding this into a shared field tracker spreadsheet that we could all access. And this gave us a structured way to immerse ourselves in the data, identify duplicate fields that were happening across forms, spot recurring themes, identify content patterns, and also evaluate language and design complexity. Next slide. Thank you. So over 1,000 form fields were analyzed, and we distilled it down to roughly 55 recurring fields across all of the forms. And this was really, this started our thinking in regards to how we should structure the information architecture for such a unified form, and really like what the purpose for such a form should serve. The 55 fields also could be grouped roughly into 6 main categories of essential information. And these were fields on personal information, fields about the disaster itself, identification fields, authorized representative fields, more on that later, assistance and support fields, and fields on consent and authorization. This last category is mainly revolving around signatures, declarations, notary involvement. And we also saw a lot of fields on eligibility pop up frequently across the forms, but the information varied too much from program to program. So we decided to keep fields on eligibility separate and at the individual application level for now. As part of the audit, we also examined instructions and other supplementary content in the forms. And what we found was paper forms often front load a lot of dense instructions and legal text at the start of a form, which can overwhelm applicants before they even begin the form filling process. A lot of the content also exceeded 6th to 8th grade reading level, which can make the forms even, harder to use or understand. And so, how did we turn our findings from the audit, or some of our findings from the audit, into an information architecture? Well, first up, we had to propose what the purpose of a unified form should serve. And based on our findings, we proposed that it should be around verifying identity and surfacing relevant or eligible services and benefits based on immediate needs and verifiable data. Any information architecture we create subsequently should support that purpose. And so for the form, we propose 6 core sections, each section presented on its own page to reduce the cognitive overwhelm on the user. So the first section is on capturing information about the disaster itself. For example, the date of the disaster, the location, the types of losses the applicant incurred. And this would help the system more immediately surface relevant services and benefits that the user might be eligible for earlier on in the process. The next section, your information, is about establishing applicant context, followed by your identity, which is about providing verifiable identity information so that someone can prove they are who they say they are. Your household captures family and dependents data, which can be critical for services like applying for food benefits. Your authorized representative is a section where applicants can declare if someone else is helping them with their application. And this step is really important because identity fraud often spikes during times of disasters. And so this section allows us to capture applicants and their representatives' details clearly in order to protect them from fraud. And finally, the additional assistance section is about surfacing critical needs for effective service matching. We also designated utility spaces within the forms, such as headers and footers, to house important supplementary content such as legal text, instructions, form titles, descriptions, and accessibility options. And also to avoid front-loading the forms, we aim to distribute guidance contextually throughout the form. So, for example, placing hints and help text right next to the fields that need them. And finally, we created just a simple visual design prototype to demonstrate our form working in practice. Our design principles centered primarily around meeting the needs of survivors, meeting accessibility standards as well, and complying with federal regulations for form design, such as Section 508 and the Plain Language Act. So some features of our form include taking a mobile-first approach, A lot of survivors often access information on their phones in low bandwidth conditions. And so our design has to be optimized for that. We also use components from the US web design system to meet WCAG 2.1 AA standards out of the box. All content is written at a plain in plain language using a direct and conversational tone at an 8th grade reading level. And we also optimize for flexibility and convenience, providing features such as login.gov button where applicants can pre-fill identity information or use the back or save for later buttons to manage their progress. And now I'm going to hand over to Lisa and our team, who's going to take us through where the form fits into the wider user journey and touch on a little bit on the nuances of data verification across agencies.
Great, thank you so much, Mei. So while we were determining the correct form information architecture, we also simultaneously were running research to assess how this form would fit into the actual real world workflows. So this gave us a zoomed out perspective of the form in context. For this, we considered how the data in the form would be verified, as well as how different agencies would have to collaborate to make it work. So to understand how this form would fit into a future workflow, we had to understand how these forms currently are verified today. So we interviewed representatives from different California state agencies to understand how they verify different data fields and how they collaborate across agencies. We worked super closely with our client partner, Caroline, to identify good stakeholders and schedule interviews. And after the interviews, we then synthesized the research in Dovetail to generate themes and recommendations. So, from our research, we learned that agencies operate independently, but still rely on data verification from each other to make sure that their forms are accurate. So, despite there being a precedent, sharing data between agencies still poses an ongoing challenge due to a variety of factors, including a mismatch of agency systems, legal hurdles, and resistance to change. So, in short, a universal form would require major collaboration between agencies and be worth the effort of changing their system. One of our speakers today, Joseph Ledoux, will actually be speaking a little later on about how these agencies manage and leverage the data that they use. So once we had an understanding of how the data was verified from our stakeholder research, we then created a service blueprint to model a preferred future, including details at the form UI level, experience level, and service design level. In this flow, you'll see that relevant agencies in colored circles at the top layer that could provide data for this form flow, such as the DMV for identification or the IRS for income verification. In the middle, in the black, we have the CDT layer, which represents how they would host the initial application form, as well as eventually a broader benefits portal that tracks the status of all these applications. And then finally, at the bottom level in white, we have our user application process, where a user fills out their form and is given the option to pre-fill information based on verified data sources. This pre-fill lets them move through the rest of the form with some of the fields now pre-populated, saving them time filling out the same fields over and over across forms, which was ultimately the purpose of our form audit. So this data captured in the forms ultimately goes back up into the agencies at the top level, which can then be stored if a resident ever applies for benefits again. De-identified benefits data could also be explored by the state to better understand a disaster's overall impact and how to improve California disaster readiness. So after we understood our user needs and mapped out a blueprint, we then shifted gears into implementation. How will this work? As you can see from our work, the blueprint showed the concept of a single intake and portal that could reduce duplication and stress. Ani, I'll now hand it over to you to show how your team made this work end-to-end for survivors replacing vital records.
Thanks, Lisa. So before we kind of set the context here, I wanted to mention that I am overseeing a program at the state of California called the Digital Identity Platform. We're essentially breaking down the barriers that Lisa alluded to with regards to data sharing and identification, so that we can make government services accessible to all Californians as seamlessly as possible. One of the critical needs for disaster survivors, we noticed very early on, was that they'd lost all of their identification documents. And that was a key need for them. And the experience for them to replace those documents in person, you could actually visit a physical disaster recovery center prior to May 31st and request a replacement there. However, those disaster recovery centers were closed on May 31st, after which you would have to visit your county recorder's office and fill in an application there. There was an alternate method to do this online, which was through a notary. You would actually go to the Department of Public Health website, start the application online, print it out, take it to a notary, have it notarized for $15 per document, and then scan or photograph it and then email it to CDPH for them to fulfill that request. So you can imagine for somebody who's actually experiencing a disaster, who's lost all of their documentation, this becomes a pretty odious process. Caroline, if you don't mind going to the next screen. So yeah, what we tried to do is essentially thought about, can we make this easier for folks that were actually trying to replace the documents? One of the things that the governor had done at that point was made the normal application fee for a replacement, which is normally about $29 per document. He declared that to be waived. However, if you still had the requirements for a notary, you'd still owe that notary $15 per document. And so we were trying to see, is there a way for us to kind of bypass or an alternate pathway to identify yourself and prove your eligibility as a disaster survivor, that you are eligible for a replacement document. Next slide. So we reimagined a user-centered experience, leveraging the identity gateway that we've built as a statewide service. One of the things that we noticed was that in order as a disaster survivor, for you to get federal relief, you have to go through the FEMA portal, and FEMA uses login.gov as their identity solution. So what we did was we said, okay, folks already have a login.gov account. We can leverage that through the identity gateway for this particular benefit. Next slide, please. So what we did was we built an application that was resident facing, going through the identity gateway, folks logging in, proving their identity and eligibility through the login.gov accounts, submitting the form online. And that actually generates a PDF to CDPH. It's fully automated, and it goes to the Department of Public Health, who then are able to fulfill that request. All of that doesn't cost the disaster survivor anything because it's essentially covered. There's no notary fee required. So the next phase would be to digitize the end-to-end digital workflow so that instead of sending a PDF to the Department of Public Health and having them fulfill that request, is there a way to digitize that part? But for our purposes, for the short term, what we did was we focused on the resident-facing experience. Next slide. So for our principles here, we're aware that these folks are going through a significant amount of stress. We want to make sure that they're comfortable using our application. There's some language in there to reassure the user that the information that they're sharing through the login.gov account is preserved and secure. And we also built for universal access. So essentially anybody that wants an account can use this service and get the replacement documents. So from our perspective, we worked with Compiler, who's our trusted service and design and development vendor, who explored how we could simplify and modernize the process for survivors. They helped us. They were crucial in helping us prototype and build this application and test it. And we went through the process of mapping the current vital records request process and discovering what opportunities there were to reduce that administrative burden and streamline that process. And we did that in a quick development cycle and in an iterative manner. So our first release was for birth certificates, followed by marriage certificates, and soon to be released death certificates, which are essentially the 3 crucial documents needed. And we always focused on getting a better user experience so that at the end of the day, the forms, as Lisa and Mei mentioned, there's not a whole lot of front-loaded heavy language. It's a simple, intuitive, field-based form, at the end of which you would hit a submit button, and that's the end of it. Next slide. As you can see, these are some of the screenshots from the form here. It simply asks you for the name on the birth certificate. It's designed to support Californians where they need it most, and it's flexible and extendable for other applications as well. So at the end of the day, if you remember at the beginning, I showed all the many steps of getting a birth certificate or a marriage certificate here. At the end of our process, there's 3 steps: an online identity verification through an existing account like a login.gov account, a complete simple web form, and then a submit button that actually sends that into the current CDPH process for fulfilling those requests. And we used, again, as I mentioned, the Identity Gateway, which is essentially a vendor-agnostic, privacy-preserving, statewide service that allows for identity and eligibility verification. One of the things I want to call out here is we're talking about eligibility verification in addition to identity. So one of the things that we did was, as a part of your login.gov, the address that you have in there, if you were in one of those fire-affected zip codes, then you are eligible for that for this benefit. So that's how we're checking. We're doing some additional logic behind the scenes on our side to verify that the folks that are actually going through this process are in fact the neediest and actually affected by the disaster. And just to reiterate, once the submission is completed, a PDF is generated in accordance with the current workflows of the Department of Public Health, so that they can actually just seamlessly get those requests in. And they're certified, they're verified as identity verified, and then they can just simply fulfill the request. Some feedback when we did the early testing, 100% completed the process successfully. Our flow was described as faster, easier, and more secure than the current method which they were using, where their personally identifiable information is actually out in the wild. Here it's more secure, and they've saved time and days and weeks. And the feedback that we got was they had high trust in government branded services. I do have a sample user experience. I don't know if the sound's going to come through here.
I might benefit from using option 2. I don't think I would. First of all, my printer is kind of a piece of crap, and it argues with me every time I try to print anything. So I'd like to avoid that. I would like to avoid driving into town because it's 15 miles from here, so 30 miles round trip, and part of that is a windy, twisty canyon road where I live. So I'd rather not go anywhere if I don't have to. And then I have to come back and do it online anyway. I mean, why not just go with option 1? I would rather do it online because I'm disabled and it's difficult for me to get around and stand in line and stuff. I think the online sounds easier just because of my issues. And I know how IDMe works, so I know it's secure.
Thank you. And then we're actually extending our work to other applications in addition to the vital records use case. This workflow can be used essentially the identity verification, eligibility verification, the form submission, and then the service delivery can be extended to any number of government services. I'm going to hand it over to Joe to talk a little bit more about the work at EDD.
Great. Thanks, Ani. Again, my name is Joe Ledoux. I'm from the Employment Development Department. I've been here for about 2 years. I spent about 20 years over at Franchise Tax Board, managing the internal and external website. So right now I'm managing an initiative called EDD Next, which includes the modernization of all of EDD. And take a minute to brag, since I see a lot of people are not in California, but some of you may heard, but California overtook Japan as far as the growth of the economy, and we're now the fourth largest economy with a GDP of over $4 trillion. Within this global powerhouse, the Employment Development Department plays a critical role in supporting our state's economy. As one of the California's largest departments, EDD supports over 9,000 employees, 185 job centers, and in support person to over 25 state disability insurance tax centers. All right. Well, and just to add to that, as many of you not be aware of this, but EDD is also one of the largest tax collection agency, second only to the IRS internationally. We have over 18,000 wage records and more than 105 billion in payroll taxes. Why am I sharing this information? Because forms matter to us a lot. Even the smallest improvements we can achieve have a profound impact at the scale we operate, helping us to serve not only California as individuals, but also the businesses that rely on us. Thank you, Carolyn. All right, I am part of the EDD Next team. EDD Next is a modernization effort of EDD to transform the customer and employee experience. It's a complete transformation, a journey we have been working on for the last couple of years. We're updating online application, we're modernizing contact centers, our processes, policies, procedures, and including forms, which got us interested in partnering in this effort. This effort directly supports the EDD Next goal, which is delivering an easier and faster customer experience, because our customer's journey with EDD begins with filling out our benefits claim forms. Thank you. For DI alone, we have over 400 forms. We have 150 data sharing agreements. We want to leverage those connections where possible, optimizing and aligning the unified forms. We are taking a crawl, walk, run approach. That's okay, Caroline. Just keep the slide there. With the disability insurance program, our goal is to learn from it and then expand from other programs like unemployment insurance. And then, sharing with the critical forms we have, make it available for other departments to leverage, to reuse them for their benefit services and have a shared model. Well, one of our lessons learned, number one, having a UX, CX, and accessibility background, having worked on the web, I was surprised to see that, while we're always taught to work enterprise, or always taught to think enterprise-wide, we need to start thinking more statewide or countywide or countrywide. Again, we're trying to when it comes down to breaking down silos, we are most effective when we're a unified state government working towards a common purpose. Collaboration isn't about just giving up our individual missions, but by sharing knowledge and resources, we become stronger. As a force multiplier, our greatest asset is our collective experience. When we collaborate, we create a force multiplier that allows us to tackle even the most daunting challenges, like the wildfires, with confidence and success. And then improving the service delivery. This isn't just more about efficiency. This is about building a better, more responsive government for all citizens. Again, you want to think about what happens when you order something from Amazon or you order something from online, and it always gives you that option, and customers have come to expect, hey, I can check out with my Apple Pay, or I can check out with my Amazon account or my Google account or anything like that. And trying to unify all those services is our number one goal. Enhanced problem solving. We don't have the same problems, but we do all have similar problems. The challenges facing our state are interconnected. Our solutions must be as well. Interdepartmental collaboration is key to creating a holistic, lasting change. And then lastly, a shared vision. By collaborating, we can break down the walls that have historically separated us, transforming our approach from a series of isolated actions into a single coordinated strategy. Again, forms are one of those things that if you're coming from the web world, it's something that you come to expect. UK.gov or the federal government all has playbooks, and California from CDT, California Department of Technology, has a playbook. So they're all, the web is a little bit ahead of establishing those form fields and standards that we have out there. It'd be nice to establish those community of practices. Not and it's up to you to create those, not just within your department, but also within departments that you have sharing agreements with, or even looking at the federal government. So lastly, it was great to it was a great lessons learned with this endeavor. It was great working with Ani and Caroline and all the folks from USDR. We learned a lot, and it also kind of iterated that we have a long way to go to really collaborate and share things, so that we're not stepping on each other's toes, that we are able to help each other and share not only our model, but also services and data and all that stuff. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you everyone who spoke, Ani, Lisa, May. I would love to end with the note to everyone in the audience that this is a reusable model. If you are interested in talking to any of us about the work we did or how you can apply it at your own agency or department, we would love to chat. This work was just so incredibly inspiring, impactful. Everyone who we worked with, all the agencies that we were able to connect with, it was just a really exciting project. And we would love to share out with everyone in the audience today all the lessons learned. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And then for now, we can open it up to the live Q&A if anyone has questions.
I think there's a few questions in the Q&A section. I think we'll start with the top. It says, did you all do this in the aftermath of the fires? What hurdles did you run into with data interoperability, both coming in and going back to the agencies? Yeah.
Yes.
Go round table on that.
We did do it in the aftermath of the LA fires. I would love to pass it off, perhaps, Ani, to you. Sure. About the data interoperability that you can speak to specifically with the end-to-end project you did with CDPH.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I was going to say that, yes, this the application that we built did happen in the aftermath of the fires. However, the California Identity Gateway it's been in existence for a number of years, and we've been working on the data interoperability and identification and eligibility verification for various state departments for years. So we were primed to kind of jump in and fill that space to actually build something of consequence for Californians. So data interoperability is something that I do day to day. So I mean, essentially mapping what departments need from an identity and eligibility perspective. So that kind of put us in a good spot there to start. Anything else from anybody else? I'm happy to hear. Okay. Looks like the next. I'm trying to see if there's an order to this. I think it's oldest is at the top or bottom. I'm not sure. We'll just take a few from here if that's okay. There's a question around understanding the integration between login.gov and ca.gov apps. Is data transmitted between the two systems, and were there legislative changes needed? I'll answer that. We did have a legislative hurdle to overcome, because obviously the California Department of Public Health currently, prior to this application, were essentially on a paper-based process, right? They needed to have a notary, and part of their statute was you need to have a notarized application. However, we took a more detailed look at their statute, and it did state that in lieu of physical notarization, if you're going through an electronic process, as long as you have what they call an identity assurance level 2, IAL2 level verification, that does meet the criteria for equivalent to notarization. And login.gov supports IAL2, and therefore we actually use login.gov as the identity provider in this case, and allowed that online process to be facilitated. However, yes, you're correct. We have to kind of, as we go forward and build out other applications, we have to be very careful that statutory limitations might either have to be updated or might be something to consider as we're building out online processes across the state.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to tackle any of the other questions here? Let's see. Did y'all? Okay, let me see.
I have them sorted by popular too, if that helps, Bonnie.
Let's see. Sort by popular. Let's go with that. Okay, what happens if the person doesn't have a login.gov account? That's a great question. So one of the things about our workflow is that once you go through the identity gateway and land on that page, you either have a login.gov account and you can simply log in, or it takes you through a workflow to create a login.gov account. So you can actually go through and create that login.gov account in the middle of this workflow. And there are certain situations where login.gov might not be the right solution for you. In this case, it was for us because a lot of the folks that are going through the disaster recovery portal on LA fires have also gone through FEMA and asked for FEMA aid, in which case you do need a login.gov account in the first place. So we leveraged FEMA criteria. Now, that being said, the identity gateway is ID provider agnostic, which means that our mission as a whole is to provide services for all Californians, whether you have a login.gov account or whether you don't, or if you've got an ID.me account or whatever. So we can plug and play any number of ID providers as a part of our solution. So one of the things that we're looking at enhancing is, can we go through a process of integrating with an accountless system where you don't have to have an account. You just provide some basic PII, and we kind of use that with your consent to kind of verify your information and then go from there. So there are a number of solutions, but this is our first stab at it, right, so to speak. Okay, the second question. You mentioned that so many residents found the online solution easier than a paper solution. What did you find with users without technology skills? Were most submissions via mobile? We have users without computers or internet. So yes, so one of the things here is that there is a certain level of, if you're going through an online experience, right, you have to have, number one, access, like to our site, our application is mobile compliant, mobile friendly. So you would be able to submit the same workflow through a mobile device. From our data, we're still very early. We just released a couple of months ago. Most of our applications are coming from desktop. from not a mobile system as we're tracking it. Connectivity could always be an issue, and that's something that we're also tracking from a CDT perspective. So it's a larger problem than what we can solve with one application, but it's something that we're constantly looking at. I think this is a question. The next question is for Lisa and Mei. How did you analyze 1,000 fields to distill to 55, manually or through AI?
Yeah, good question. We actually used a mix of AI and manual analysis. We didn't actually want to talk about our use of AI because we were sort of just using it anyway within our normal workflows, but we really wanted to give it a try with the analysis. And so AI was great for the heavy lifting. Things like scaffolding the audit, so providing a scaffold structure that we can work off. Things like adding up numbers, I mean, just a numbers game, or giving us a quick first pass at grouping similar fields. But when it came to spotting thematic patterns or subtle differences in context, it really struggled. And we were finding quite a few number of errors, inaccuracies, some hallucinations. And so we really fell back on manual validation for that. And I mentioned immersing ourselves in the data. I think as a researcher, you really do need to immerse yourself in it, and sometimes just like bathe in it, I suppose, bathe in the data, because then you're able to pick up on the nuances that AI misses. For example, fields that looked identical, but they served very different purposes across agencies. And that manual validation step is really what gave us confidence in narrowing that list down to the 55 fields.
You want me to take the next one? Going through this process, what do you wish you knew when you started this work? How about that? And I think number one is just the importance of stakeholder alignment early on. I think it's really, getting all the state departments, not just the ones that we reviewed, but just getting everybody, IT, legal, and all the accessibility teams on the goal, scope, and definition. Number two is just the complexity of the legacy systems. There's inconsistent legacy forms and processes, not only in EDD, but throughout the state. It's just really understanding what the need is before designing a new model. And then the best thing is just the need for a modular design approach. It's just being able to design reusable components that can be flexible and then assembled based on a case-by-case basis. And then, iteration is not optional. It's just, you've got to do, that agile, rinse, repeat, and just keep on user testing and iteration, especially when it comes to accessibility and language needs. Number 5 probably is just data governance is a big deal. I think Ani already hit on that. It's just how data will be stored, shared, and secured. And it's just, you need to get on that early to make sure that you avoid rework and any type of legal issues. And then change management. I think every department, especially the one that I came from, and we're already meeting with another tax department. Actually, EDD is actually meeting with a couple of different tax departments in California. It's just, what do they have? What are they going through change? And what will it take to get not only employees, but and customers onto this new methodology? So yeah, just change management is always a hurdle.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Ani, Lisa, Mei. I think that brings us to time, as I know there's some other great presentations coming up that folks might want to head to. So I just want to wrap us up by saying thank you again to everyone who attended our session. Thank you to my incredible co-presenters. And we are just so honored to be here, to have been invited to FormFest and to speak and to share the goodness that we learned and did together. So thank you again, and have a good rest of your Form Festival, folks.